Hello everybody, hope you're okay. I am back to read the last part of the story of the BFG. So last time we got the very exciting part of the story as the BFG took the army and they tied up all the giants and they flew them back on helicopters back to London, England. We're going to find out what happens to them now. While the giants were being captured, a tremendous bustle and hustle was going on back home in England. Every earth digger and mechanical contrivance, big JCBs, the whole lot of them in the country had been mobilised to dig up the colossal big hole in which these 9 giants were going to be permanently imprisoned. They dug out a big jail for them. 10,000 men and 10,000 machines worked ceaselessly through the night under powerful arc lights, and the massive task was completed only just in time. The hole itself was about twice the size of a football field and 500 feet deep. The walls were perpendicular, straight, and engineers had calculated that there was no way that a giant could escape once he was put in down there. Even if all the 9 giants were to stand on each other's shoulders, the topmost giant would still be 50 feet from the top of the hole. This 9 giant carrying helicopters now hovered over the pit. The giants, one by one, were lowered down into the floor of the pit, but they were still trussed up, tied up, and now came the very tricky business of releasing them from their bonds. Nobody wanted to go down there and do that, because in the moment the giant was released and free, he'd be sure to turn on the wretched person and gobble him up. As usual, the BFG had an answer. "I has told you before," he says, "giants is never eating another giant. So I is going to go down there and I shall untie them myself before you can say rat Jobson." And there's a picture of helicopters lowering them down into the giant pit, with thousands of fascinated spectators, including the Queen of England herself, peering down into the pit. The BFG was lowered down there on a rope. One by one, he released and untied the giants. They stood up, stretched their stiffened limbs, and started leaping about in fury. "Why is they putting us down here in this grub sludging hole?" they shouted at the BFG. "Because you is guzzling up human beings," the BFG answered. "I's always warning you not to do that. You've never taken the slightest bit of notice." "In that case," the flesh lumpy bellowed, "I thinks I's be guzzing up you instead." And the BFG grabbed hold of the dangling rope and was lifted up out of the pit just in time. The great big bulging sack he had brought back with him from Giant Country, full of his battles, lay at the top of the pit now. "What is in that bag?" the Queen asked. BFG put an arm into the sack and he pulled out a gigantic black and white striped object, the size of a man. "These here is Snozcumbers," he cried. "This is the repulsant Snozcumber, your Magister, and that is what we is going to give those disgusting giants to eat from now on." "May I have a little taste?" the Queen asked. "Oh no, don't do that, don't, your Magister. It's tasted of trog filth and pib's quickle." And with that, he tossed down the Snozcumbers down to the giants in the pit below. "There's your supper," he shouted. "Have a munch on that." And he fished out more Snozcumbers from the sack and he threw them down to the giants. And the giants below howled and cursed. "Arr!" And the BFG just laughed. "It serves them right and centre," he said. "What shall we feed them on when all the Snozcumbers are used up?" the Queen asked him. Oh, they's never been used up, Magister, the BFG answered. I's also bringing this sack with a whole bunch of Snodscumber plants, which I is giving, with your permission, to the royal gardener here to put in the soil. And then we is having an everlasting supply of repulsant Snodscumbers to feed these thirst bloody giants on. Oh, what a clever fellow you are, the Queen said. You're not very well educated, but you really are nobody's fool. I can see that. And there's a fantastic picture of the BFG with the stinky Snodscumbers out of that sack to feed the giants with. So they're all trapped in jail. Last bit. Now, every country in the world that had in the past been visited by the foul man-eating giants, they sent telegrams of congratulations and thanks to the BFG and to Sophie. Kings and presidents and prime ministers and rulers of every kind showered the enormous giant and the little girl with compliments and thank yous, as well as all sorts of medals and presents. The ruler of India sent the BFG a magnificent elephant, the very thing he'd been wishing for all his life. The king of Arabia sent them a camel each. The Lama of Tibet sent them a llama each. Wellington sent them 100 pairs of wellies each. Panama sent them some beautiful hats. The king of Sweden sent them a barrelful of sweet and sour pork. Jersey sent them some pullovers. And there was no end of gratitude from all of the world. The Queen herself gave orders that a special house with tremendous high ceilings was to be built in Windsor Great Park, next to her own castle, for the BFG to now live in. And a very pretty little cottage was put up next door to that house for Sophie. The BFG's house was to have a special dream storing room in it with hundreds of shelves where the BFG could put his beloved bottles of dreams. What's more, he was given the title of the Royal Dream Blower. He was allowed to go galloping off and blow his splendid fizz wizards in through the windows to all the sleeping children of the world, and letters poured into his house by the million from children begging him to pay them a visit. Meanwhile, tourists from all over the globe came flocking around to gaze down in wonder at that pit with the 9 horrendous men-eating giants in it. They came especially at feeding time, because feeding time was when the Snodscumbers were being thrown down into the pit. And it was a pleasure for them to listen to the howls and groans and the horror coming up from the pit below as the giants began to chew on the filthiest tasting vegetable on earth. There was only one disaster. 3 silly men who had drunk too much beer for lunch. They decided to climb over the fence surrounding the pit, and of course they fell in. There were yells of delight from the giants below, followed by the crunching of bones. The head keeper immediately put up a big notice, a big sign on the fence saying, "It is forbidden to feed the giants." And after that, there were no more disasters. There they are, putting up the sign. Look. The BFG expressed a wish to learn how to speak properly, and Sophie herself, who had loved him as she would a father, she volunteered to give him lessons every day. She even taught him how to spell and how to write sentences, and he turned out to be a splendid, intelligent pupil. In his spare time, he would read books. He became a tremendous reader of books. He read all of Charles Dickens, who he no longer called Dahl's Chickens, and he read all of Shakespeare and literally thousands of other books. He also started to write essays about his own life. When Sophie read some of them, she said, "These are very good. I think perhaps one day you could become a real writer, BFG." "Oh, I would love that," cried the BFG. Do you think I really could? I know you could, Sophie said. Why don't you start by writing a book about you and me? Very well, the BFG said. I'll give it a try. And so he did. He worked very hard on this book, and in the end, he finished it. He completed it. Rather shyly, he showed it. He showed his book to the Queen. And the Queen read it aloud to her grandchildren. And then the Queen said, I think we ought to get this book printed up properly and published so that other children can read it. And this was then arranged. But because the BFG was a very modest giant, he wouldn't put his own name on the book. He used somebody else's name instead. But where, you might ask, is this book that the BFG wrote? It's right here. We've just finished reading it. The BFG. But really, it's by the BFG. And that's the end of the story. Right, I hope you enjoyed that story, if you're still listening out there. And I hope you've enjoyed your summer holidays and still got another couple of weeks to enjoy before you come back to school. So I will see you back at school soon. So if you see me, make sure you give me a wave and say hello. And I hope you're all good. See you soon. Bye-bye.